Hello and thank you for being with us on the road to Beijing, our special report show taking you up to the start of the Olympic Games on August 8th. The Olympic flame continues its route across China. A minute's silence is observed at each stage in honor of those who lost their lives in the Sichuan quake.
It's now become a ritual, marking a minute of silence for the victims of the recent earthquake in China. An opportunity for the entire nation to rally together behind a single cause, giving way to rather amazing crowd scenes. The Olympic torch continues its relay. This Tuesday was in Hefei, and the spotlight was on national athletes. The first carrier being Li Na, an Olympic diving champion at the 2000 Olympics in Sydney. She'll be relayed by 222 other carriers. In addition to athletes, there'll be people who took part in the Sichuan quake rescue effort, as well as foreign figures. Hefei will be the starting point of a 3-day-long journey encompassing more than 900 kilometers throughout the Anhui province, a central province as densely populated as France. Earlier this week, Chinese officials announced that the torch will merely be passing through Tibet for a day instead of the 3 initially scheduled. Another Olympic torch had already journeyed to the province this month and been taken to the top of Mount Everest. In the meantime, its sister torch continues its relay. After the Anhui province, it'll be going west to Hubei.
For athletes, preparation continues as usual. Not all athletes are training to represent their country of birth, however. A case in point, 30-year-old French table tennis player Xian Yifang competing at the Olympic Games for the first time. Xian He was born in China, but will be in competition as a member of the French team.
This is Xian Yifang, the only female table tennis player to represent France at the Beijing Olympics. It will be her first Olympics and also her first homecoming. A naturalized French citizen, she hasn't returned to her native China since she left the country a decade ago at the age of 19.
The Olympics will be held in my native country where my family is and everything, so it'll feel different compared to other competitions. For me, it's a bit like playing at home.
Today, she calls her club near Rouen, western France, her home ground. But her table tennis career started in Baoding, some 30 kilometers south of the Chinese capital, Beijing. Like many in China, her talent was discovered early on, at age 7. But in a country where table tennis is the most popular sport with 30 million competitive athletes, hopes of becoming a top player were slim. She decided to chase her dreams abroad.
It's true that the French national team has often criticized other countries for having many Chinese in their national teams. Today we have one. It's great that she's qualified for the Olympics, but I think it's also a good thing that the International Table Tennis Federation has put a limit to the number of Chinese players. It's a bit pejorative perhaps, but otherwise all the countries will have their national teams represented by Chinese.
Yifang says she didn't get any help from the Table Tennis Federation to obtain a French nationality. Although she remains emotionally attached to her native country, her coach says she's definitely part of the French team.
I think that she's proud to represent France. She's done well here, and we have all accepted her as one of us. Now she will also play for the national championship, which she's twice failed to win. I'm sure she wants this title too.
For 10 years since arriving from China, Yifang has devoted all her time trying to reach the highest echelons of the French table tennis. Her ambitions don't stop here.
I want to succeed. I don't know, I hope I can get a medal. But I'm going to do my very best. I don't want to have any regrets in my career.
Currently ranked 61st in the world, Yifang's weakness is performing under pressure. But in Beijing, she may almost feel at home.
Our guest this week is Philippe Rochaud, one of the senior reporters at France 2. Philippe Rochaud is also the channel's former Beijing correspondent, where he worked for 6 years. He has authored a work which has recently been published, inspired by his time in China, called Living with the Chinese. Hello, Philippe. Can I ask you, first of all, what changes have you noted in China in the run-up to the Games?
Since China was awarded the Olympics on the 12th of July 2007, the Chinese wanted to make that a success, so they started building the stadium, the swimming pool. They started demolishing old Beijing to make it clean, raising many buildings. They also started teaching taxi drivers English. Also, the Beijing population was no longer allowed to walk around bare-chested, which is very hard in the hot Beijing summer. English lessons for taxi drivers and so on. So there was this then desire to make this a worthy Olympics then, crowning that particular event.
Which China will the spectators of Olympic Games discover?
Well, China wants to show that it's clean and modern to the outside world, where then the marginal groups, the down and outs, have been evacuated out of the city. And they do that whenever there's a major political event, such as the meetings of the party. Those marginal groups are basically evacuated from outside the city, so that the city looks presentable.
Between 20 and 30,000 foreign journalists will be on the spot. Will they be able to work freely? You were the French correspondent in Beijing.
During the Games, the officials will be escorted, tightly controlled and channeled with ID, and a lot of checks on the ID. They don't want then any old the journalists will have to be accredited. They don't want journalists coming in who pretend to be journalists and who will then kick up a fuss and cause some political fuss and upheaval. So they're very much afraid of that, and there'll be some very tight checks.
What about the visa policy? It's very restrictive, isn't it, at the moment?
There is a restrictive visa policy that probably will only last during the Games, one assumes, because you could normally receive a 3-month tourist visa. Now you can only get a 1-month tourist visa. So you need to be accredited.
The big question is, should the Olympic Games have been attributed to China? In the last chapter of your book, you say yes.
I believe so. China is a quarter of mankind at the moment. When the IOC president then took that decision, when you see 25,000 journalists arriving in China, the information will obviously leak. No one has. There will be some talk about Tibet. No one would have talked about Tibet then 4 months afterwards had the fact that the Games then occurred within such close a time frame. France needs to be represented. Should it send its head of state to the opening ceremony, we need to be represented with dignity and worthily, and I certainly supported the decision.
Philippe Rochaud, thank you very much for talking to us. Before we go, here's a sight you won't see every day. Sailboats piloted by the French Olympic team on the river Seine. Boat traffic was briefly halted in order to allow this sailing craft room to tack back and forth in the heart of Paris. And finally, to end this week's show, a quick glimpse at our map, fresh from its trek across the Chinese provinces. This coming week, we'll see the torch head south, close to the border with Vietnam. And that's the end of our show. Thank you for staying with us. We'll be back next week for the next leg of On the Road to Beijing on France 24.